The sun hung low over the sleepy town of Willow Creek, casting long shadows along the cobblestone streets. Clara walked slowly, her hands buried in the pockets of her faded coat, her mind heavy with thoughts she didn't want to share. At 28, life had not unfolded as she imagined. Her engagement, once a promise of love and stability, had crumbled months ago, leaving her with an emptiness that seemed impossible to fill. Friends' advice echoed in her mind, time heals all wounds. Yet, in her small, quiet world, time had only deepened her loneliness. She turned into the farmer's market square, drawn by the promise of something simple. Fresh apples, the scent of baked bread, the chatter of neighbors. The stalls were alive with color and warmth, yet Clara felt detached, like a spectator watching someone else's life. She picked up a bunch of daisies, their yellow petals bright against the dull gray of her coat. For a moment she allowed herself to smile. Maybe today something small could pierce the heaviness she carried. And then she saw him. A man standing alone by a stall of homemade preserves, tall, dark-haired, and quiet. He had an air of reserve, as though the world around him was slightly out of reach, and yet there was a magnetism that drew her gaze. He looked at the jars thoughtfully, his fingers brushing lightly over the labels, and when his eyes met hers, it was as if the world had narrowed to the space between them. There was a sadness there, subtle but undeniable, a weight carried silently on his shoulders. "Beautiful morning," she said almost automatically, not entirely sure why she was speaking. He nodded, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, it is." His voice was calm, low, measured, but there was something about it that stirred an unfamiliar curiosity in her. Clara felt a flutter of something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. But there was caution too. The stranger's reserved demeanor hinted at secrets, at corners of life he did not reveal. She found herself drawn to him, wanting to know more, but wary of what she might find. They walked in the same direction through the market, sometimes stopping at adjacent stalls, exchanging brief words, small smiles, but never lingering too long. He introduced himself simply as Elias. There was no flourish, no attempt to impress, just a name, quiet and unobtrusive, yet somehow permanent. It settled in her mind and she repeated it silently, Elias. By the time Clara left the market, her heart was strangely unsettled. She could not explain why the memory of his glance lingered, nor why a trace of anxiety had taken root alongside the spark of curiosity. There was an energy between them, subtle but undeniable, like a story hovering just beyond reach, waiting to be told. As she walked back to her small apartment, the weight of her loneliness felt lighter, as if meeting Elias had shifted something inside her. But beneath that fragile hope, a quiet unease whispered, "Sometimes the things that draw you in are the very things that can hurt you most." In the days that followed, Clara and Elias met frequently. Their encounters were brief at first. A coffee at the local cafe, a walk along the riverbank, a shared laugh over a stall owner's eccentric stories, but with each meeting the connection deepened. Clara felt alive in a way she hadn't for years. The dull ache of loneliness softened, replaced by the thrill of possibility. Elias was quiet, always observing before speaking, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. He shared fragments of his life, stories half told, moments that hinted at sorrow, at struggles he refused to fully disclose. He never mentioned family or friends. He never lingered on the past. Clara accepted these gaps with a mixture of curiosity and instinctive caution, sensing that pressing too hard might shatter the fragile bond forming between them. Their days became a whirlwind. Mornings spent wandering through the countryside, afternoons at the market, evenings under soft lamplight at small diners. They laughed, they shared secrets, and occasionally they sat in silence, the air heavy with emotions neither dared name. Clara felt her heart racing, her walls crumbling. But with the joy came a quiet tension, a hint that Elias's reserve hid more than shyness. Friends and family noticed the change in Clara. "He seems mysterious," her sister warned one evening. "Are you sure you know him well enough?" But Clara only smiled, caught in the momentum of her emotions. There was something compelling about Elias, a depth she longed to explore, even if she didn't fully understand it. Within a few months, the intensity of their bond led them to a startling decision. They would marry. It was impulsive, yes, but it felt inevitable, like two halves of a story finally finding their place. The ceremony was small, intimate, in a quiet chapel surrounded by trees. Clara remembered the way Elias looked at her, a mixture of tenderness and something she couldn't quite name, perhaps fear, perhaps longing. After the wedding, they moved into a charming house on the outskirts of Willow Creek, nestled between thick woods and rolling fields. The house was everything she had dreamed of, cozy, isolated, peaceful. Yet the seclusion carried a quiet tension. The silence was almost palpable, broken only by the wind through the trees and the occasional call of a distant bird. It was beautiful, but it also whispered that secrets could hide in corners untouched by light. Clara was happy, undeniably so, yet she could not shake a subtle foreboding. Sometimes she caught Elias staring into the distance, his gaze unfocused, his expression unreadable. Other times he would disappear for hours, claiming errands or work, though the town was small and quiet. She told herself it was nothing. He was private, perhaps even haunted by memories she could not yet understand. And yet the feeling lingered. Hope, excitement, and unease mingled inside her, creating a fragile tension that seemed to hum just beneath the surface. She was in love, yes, but love had never felt this intense, this complicated. Every smile, every touch, carried the promise of joy and the threat of pain. In the quiet of their new home, as Clara unpacked boxes and arranged flowers, she realized she was standing at the edge of something extraordinary. Life had delivered a stranger into her world, someone enigmatic, someone who made her heart both race and ache. She knew instinctively that meeting Elias had changed everything, and that the story they were beginning would not be simple. It was only the beginning. The house on the outskirts of Willow Creek was quiet, almost too quiet. Clara loved the peace at first, the gentle sway of trees outside the window, the occasional crow cawing in the distance, the soft hum of the wind through the fields. But after a few weeks, the silence began to feel heavier, like a weight pressing against her chest. She would glance toward the back garden, where a solitary oak cast long shadows over the lawn, and sometimes catch Elias staring at it, expression tense, eyes distant. Clara tried not to read too much into it. Everyone had their secrets. Everyone carried something unspoken. Yet the more she noticed his oddities, the more uneasy she became. He avoided certain rooms, the small attic with the dusty window, the basement that smelled faintly of damp earth. When she asked him about it, he would shrug, smile politely, and change the subject. His evasiveness only made her curiosity grow. Some days he would vanish without warning. Running errands, he would say vaguely, but the town was small, the streets familiar, and no one seemed to see him. Clara tried to brush it off, but she began to notice subtle signs he had been elsewhere. Footprints in the dew, a chair slightly moved, the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. At night, the house seemed to breathe in its own way. Clara would lie in bed, listening to floorboards creak as if someone were pacing, shadows moving in corners where no one stood. She would convince herself it was the wind, the house settling, her imagination running wild. Still, an icy knot of fear gripped her each time the noise repeated. One evening, she wandered into the basement, drawn by a faint flicker of curiosity. The air was colder than she expected, damp and earthy. There was a faint smell, metallic and sour, and she wrinkled her nose in confusion. A shadow moved across the wall and she froze. Nothing was there, only the dim light from the lone bulb swinging gently. Her heart thudded in her chest as she hurried back upstairs, feeling both foolish and unnerved. Elias noticed her jumpiness but said nothing, only giving her a small, measured smile. She wanted to ask him if he had been in the basement earlier, but the words died on her lips. There was something unspoken between them, a line she did not yet understand. Clara began to wonder if she even wanted to cross it. And yet she loved him. It was a love tinged with fear and fascination. The quiet moments when he would take her hand and look at her with those intense eyes made her pulse race. She loved the way he listened, truly listened, when she spoke about her dreams, her fears, her failed engagement. But the uncertainty shadowed every laugh, every touch. She could not escape the feeling that beneath the calm, there was a storm. Over time she began noticing more oddities. A window left slightly ajar when she knew she had closed it. The oak tree in the garden seemed to cast shadows that shifted unnaturally, even in the middle of the day. Once, while watering plants, she found disturbed soil near its roots, as if something had been recently dug or buried. Her stomach tightened, but when she asked Elias about it, he smiled and said, "Probably just a rabbit." But the nervous twitch in his fingers betrayed him. Arguments began to surface, small at first. Clara's curiosity clashed with Elias's evasiveness. "Why don't you want me to go into the basement?" she asked one night, voice trembling. He looked away, jaw tight. "It's nothing," he said, but there was something in the word that made her skin crawl. She wanted to push, to demand the truth, but she also feared what she might find. Each day became a careful dance between love and unease. Clara would catch herself staring at him for hours, trying to decipher the shadow behind his eyes, wondering if the man she adored was the same man who seemed haunted by some invisible weight. Sleep became difficult. Shadows crept along the walls of her bedroom, the floorboards groaned beneath invisible footsteps, and sometimes she thought she heard whispers. She would lie awake, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling, and try to convince herself it was all her imagination. But deep down, a quiet terror lingered, an instinctive knowledge that something was buried, something dangerous, something hidden in plain sight. Even in her fear, Clara felt trapped by her emotions. She could not abandon Elias. She wanted to understand him, to be the one he trusted, to see the man behind the secrets. Every time she caught him watching her, eyes dark and distant, a strange mix of longing and regret, she felt both drawn in and repelled. She loved him, yes, but love had never been this complicated, this consuming. In the stillness of the house, surrounded by the whisper of the trees and the distant hum of life beyond the fields, Clara realized she had crossed a threshold. Life with Elias was no longer simple. The quiet beauty of the house, the charm of their secluded life, was shadowed by the unknown. Every creak, every strange smell, every evasive glance was a reminder that beneath the calm lay something darker, something waiting to be revealed. And Clara, for all her love and hope, knew that soon she would have to confront it. Weeks turned into months, and the quiet house on the outskirts of Willow Creek began to feel less like a home and more like a place that held its own secrets. Clara had grown used to the rhythm of her life with Elias, the fleeting smiles, the unspoken tension, the thrill of love tempered with unease. But the small signs she had once brushed aside now pressed against her mind with insistent weight. It started with old papers she discovered tucked behind a loose panel in the attic. Dust covered the edges, yellowed with age, the handwriting fading and shaky. She had found letters, old deeds, and newspaper clippings, each one hinting at stories she had never heard. Some were mundane, sales of land, wills, small-town disputes. But others were darker, reports of disappearances, whispers of tragedies that had touched the house long before she and Elias had arrived. She felt a chill crawl down her spine as she read one particularly old clipping. A man not unlike Elias in appearance had vanished decades ago. No trace, no explanation, nothing but the uneasy silence of the town that moved on as if nothing had happened. Clara held the paper tightly, her mind racing. Was this a coincidence, or was it connected to Elias? Her thoughts returned to him often. She noticed the way his body tensed whenever she mentioned the garden or the basement. He avoided the attic entirely, casting his eyes down, fingers brushing absent-mindedly over his lips. He had always been private, but now the secrecy felt deliberate, purposeful. It was no longer simply a quirk of his nature. It was a warning, subtle but unmistakable. Nightmares began to haunt her sleep. She dreamed of the back garden, dark and moonlit, where a freshly dug grave appeared as though by some invisible hand. Whispers curled around her, soft, unintelligible, but full of meaning she could almost understand. She would wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the distant call of an owl echoing her own fear. Some nights, the dream would follow her into the living room, and she would catch herself staring at the shadows cast by the oak tree, half expecting movement that wasn't there. One afternoon, Clara wandered into the backyard while Elias was out. She knelt by the base of the oak tree, brushing the earth with her fingers. It was softer than the surrounding soil, uneven, disturbed in a way that made her stomach tighten. She pressed her palm to the ground, feeling the hollow beneath, imagining the shape of a body resting below. She jumped back, heart hammering, as if the earth itself had whispered a warning. Later, she found a small, rusty key hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace. It was unmarked, its purpose unknown, but when she held it, she felt an inexplicable pull, a curiosity mixed with dread. Something about the key felt alive, like it belonged to a secret door, a place she wasn't supposed to open. Elias noticed her fascination and grew increasingly tense. One evening, as she traced her fingers over the key, he reached for it quickly, his hands trembling. "Clara, don't," he said, voice low, urgent. She recoiled, startled by the raw emotion in his tone. His eyes, usually calm and distant, burned with something unspoken, fear, shame, desperation. He turned away, leaving her alone with questions that clawed at her mind. The tension in the house grew thicker with each passing day. Clara began to feel trapped, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Every corner held a shadow that wasn't there before. Every floorboard groaned like a warning. She could hear footsteps in the night, soft, deliberate, as if someone, or something, was walking just beyond the edge of her vision. Once, she caught a flicker of movement in the basement doorway, though she had left it locked. Her friends began to notice her growing unease. "You look exhausted," her sister said during one visit. "Is everything okay?" Clara forced a smile, hiding the terror that had begun to bloom inside her. "I'm fine," she said, but even to her own ears, the words rang hollow. She was not fine. She was unraveling, pulled between the love she felt for Elias and the mounting fear that she did not truly know him, or the house they now shared. It was during one of these restless nights that she had another vision, sharper this time. The garden behind the house glowed under moonlight, and a figure crouched at the edge of the oak tree's shadow. It was indistinct at first, a blur of darkness, but as she approached, the figure became clearer and her blood ran cold. The grave she had seen in her earlier dreams lay open, its soil fresh and dark. She stumbled backward, heart pounding, tripping over the garden hose, the sound echoing like a scream in the still night. Clara began noticing small symbols etched into corners of the house, scratches on the wood, marks in the dust, signs that something had been kept secret, carefully hidden. She couldn't explain why, but a sense of obsession began to take root in her mind. She had to know the truth, even if the knowledge brought her more fear than she could bear. The house that once promised peace and love now felt like a cage. The beauty of its seclusion had transformed into something oppressive, threatening. Clara's love for Elias battled with the dread that had begun to permeate every waking moment. She wanted to trust him, to believe in the life they were building, but the secrets of the house, and the shadows in his eyes, made her question everything. Something was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the creaking floors, in the way the wind whispered through the trees. The calm she had once known was gone, replaced by a creeping, suffocating tension. And Clara understood, with a sinking certainty, that the life she had entered with Elias was not what it seemed. The story they were living held shadows that were growing darker by the day, shadows she could no longer ignore. Clara could no longer ignore the gnawing sense of unease that had taken root in her chest. The dreams, the whispers, the disturbed soil behind the oak tree, all of it coalesced into an unrelenting question. What is Elias hiding? One evening, the air in the house was heavy and still, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Clara found Elias in the living room, sitting in the low lamplight, hands clasped, staring blankly at the floor. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in her voice. "Elias, we need to talk." He looked up, eyes dark and unreadable. There was tension in the way his shoulders squared, as if bracing himself for a battle. "About what?" he asked quietly, though his voice carried an edge. "The house. The garden. The basement. Everything," Clara said, her words rushing out in a mixture of fear and frustration. "I can't ignore it anymore. You've been hiding things from me and She stopped, realizing the tremor in her hands betrayed her anxiety. "I need to know the truth." Elias's face softened for a brief moment, and she thought she saw vulnerability flicker in his eyes. But then he shook his head. "Clara, some things are better left buried." His tone was almost pleading, but it only intensified her fear. Better left buried? The words felt like a warning, and yet they only drove her curiosity further. That night Clara could not sleep. Every shadow seemed to whisper his secrets, every floorboard groan a confession waiting to be heard. By dawn she had made a decision. She would investigate herself. She began with the town records, visiting the small, dusty office in Willow Creek. The clerk looked up with polite curiosity as she sifted through old newspapers and property records. Days turned into weeks as Clara pieced together fragments of the house's history. Names of former owners, reports of missing people, strange entries about abandoned properties, and rumors of tragedies that had never been fully explained. One article stood out. Dated decades ago, it told of a man who had disappeared from Willow Creek under mysterious circumstances. Neighbors described strange noises, unexplained shadows, and the faint scent of earth turned in a garden behind a now abandoned home. Clara's hands trembled as she read. She traced the words with her finger, heart pounding. She couldn't ignore the similarities, the oak tree, the disturbed soil, the isolation of the house. She confronted Elias that evening, armed with the knowledge she had painstakingly gathered. "Elias," she said, voice trembling, "this house, there's something wrong. People disappeared here. Things happened here. And you've been hiding it from me." His eyes darkened and he turned away, shoulders rigid. "Clara, I've told you everything I can. You don't understand." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the calm he usually maintained. "I'm not that man. None of this is who I am." Clara stepped closer, frustration boiling into fear. "Then tell me why you act so strange. Why the basement? The attic? Why do you avoid the garden? I can feel it, Elias. There's something here. Something buried." He froze as though struck, and for a moment, the room was silent except for their breathing. Then slowly he shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You shouldn't have gone digging, Clara. Some truths, some pasts, are dangerous. The fear in his eyes was different now. Not the quiet unease she had felt before, but something heavier, something that hinted at trauma, guilt, and loss. Clara realized he was not a villain but a man trapped by his own history, by secrets that clawed at him with relentless force. Her heart ached for him, yet she could not let the terror in her mind dissipate. Driven by a mix of love and fear, Clara expanded her investigation. She spoke to older residents, neighbors who had lived in Willow Creek for decades. One woman recalled hearing rumors about a disappearance, a man whose face had been described as familiar, as though he had walked among them but vanished without a trace. Another remembered a garden, where the earth seemed to move on its own, and the air smelled faintly of damp soil even in dry weather. Each story was a thread, weaving a tapestry of mystery that circled closer and closer to Elias. Clara's pulse raced as she realized the pattern. Something, or someone, was hidden in plain sight, masked by time and silence. She returned home one evening, shaken, determined to find answers. Elias was waiting as if he had sensed her thoughts. He didn't speak at first, merely watching her with those dark, haunted eyes. She could feel the weight of the secrets pressing down on them both. Finally, she asked the question that had consumed her, Who is buried behind the house? Elias's body tensed. He opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowed, and let out a long, shuddering breath. It's complicated, he said, voice low. Some things cannot be undone. Some things are better left hidden. Clara's mind raced. The clues, the dreams, the disturbed soil, it all pointed to something terrible. She felt both terror and resolve, understanding that love alone would not protect her from the truth. She had to see for herself. That night, she went into the garden, heart hammering, flashlight in hand. The moon cast long, silver shadows across the lawn, and the oak tree loomed over her like a sentinel. She knelt near the disturbed patch of earth she had noticed before, the soil soft and hollow beneath her fingers. She pressed her hand into it and felt emptiness. A shiver ran down her spine. The air seemed to thicken, the darkness pressing closer. She heard nothing at first, just the rustle of leaves in the wind. But then, faintly, she thought she heard a sound, subtle and deliberate, the scrape of earth as if something had been moved recently. Clara staggered back, chest heaving. The garden was no longer a place of peace. It was a threshold, a warning. And she knew deep in her bones that the next steps would change everything. The past, the house, Elias, it all converged here in the soil beneath her trembling hands. And she would have to confront it. Clara could no longer ignore the gnawing feeling that had haunted her for months. The attic, the basement, the disturbed soil behind the oak tree, it all pointed to something hidden, something buried, something dangerous. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold, she made her decision. She had to see for herself. She slipped out of the house quietly, the floorboards creaking softly beneath her feet. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The back garden was cloaked in shadow, the oak tree looming over the lawn like a silent sentinel. Her heart pounded, but a strange clarity steadied her trembling hands. This was the moment she would confront the truth. The patch of disturbed soil was still there, softer than the surrounding ground, hollow beneath her fingertips. Her breath caught in her throat. She knelt, brushing the earth aside slowly, carefully, almost afraid of what she might find. With each handful of soil removed, a chilling realization grew in her chest. This was no ordinary patch of ground. Something, or someone, was buried here recently. Clara froze, her mind racing. The newspaper clippings, Elias's strange behavior, the nightmares, they all converged in this one moment. The air felt heavier now, pressing against her skin. She swallowed hard, her fingers shaking as they traced the hollow. Then she saw it, a small dark shape beneath the soil. Her heart skipped a beat, a cold dread spreading through her veins. The figure was unmistakable. A human shape, wrapped in the stillness of the earth, buried just beyond the safety of the house. Clara's instincts screamed at her to run, to flee, but something rooted her to the spot. She had to know. She dug faster now, hands trembling, the soil crumbling around her fingers. And then she saw him. Elias, or someone who looked exactly like him. Her breath caught and she staggered back, her mind struggling to comprehend the impossible. How could it be him? She remembered the stories, the dreams, the warnings in his eyes, and yet here he was, lying beneath the soil as if time itself had hidden him from the world. Memories flashed through her mind like shards of glass. She recalled the newspaper articles, the whispers of disappearances, the secrets of the house. And suddenly it all made sense. Elias had a past no one knew, a life he had tried to bury along with someone, or something he could not save. The realization filled her with horror and grief. Clara sank to her knees, heart pounding, tears streaming down her cheeks. Fear and compassion tangled inside her. How had he survived? Was this some twisted deception, a staged death, or had he been forced to disappear from the world? Every scenario seemed more terrifying than the last. Then, through the chaos in her mind, a faint memory surfaced. A story Elias had once told, fragmented and incomplete, about danger, about hiding, about survival. She began to understand. He had lived a life on the run, a life marked by loss, fear, and secrets that could not be spoken. The grave was not just a symbol of death, it was a symbol of the life he had left behind, the life that had shaped the man she loved. Clara's hands trembled as she brushed the earth over her fingers. She felt the weight of his suffering, the burden he had carried alone for so long. Her love for him, once tinged with unease and suspicion, now transformed into something deeper. Empathy, sorrow, and an aching desire to protect him from the shadows that had followed him for decades. And yet the fear remained. The truth was too heavy, too complex, too dangerous. She realized she could not simply dig him out of the past, could not erase the years of trauma, of running, of hiding. The grave was a reminder of all that had been lost, all that could never be recovered. Clara stepped back, her hands stained with soil, chest heaving. The moon had risen now, casting silvery light across the garden. The oak tree's shadow stretched long and dark, and she felt the presence of the past pressing down on her. Elias's absence was palpable, but so was his humanity, the man beneath the secrets, the pain, the survival. Her mind raced. What would she do now? Could she confront him with what she had discovered? Would he understand, or would the weight of the truth destroy them both? She felt the tremor of fear and anticipation run through her body, knowing that the next steps would be irreversible. The wind whispered through the branches, stirring the leaves. Clara knelt again, pressing her hand to the hollow earth, and whispered a silent promise. She would uncover the truth, she would face the shadows, she would not turn away. She owed it to him, to herself, to the life they could have if the secrets were finally brought to light. As she stood, she noticed something she had not seen before. A small piece of fabric, half buried in the soil, frayed and worn. Her fingers traced it gently, and a memory surged forward. Elias, as he had been in her dreams, as he had been in fragments of stories he could not tell. The man she loved had survived horrors she could scarcely imagine, and now she was standing on the edge of it, ready to confront the darkness he had carried for so long. Clara felt a mixture of horror, grief, compassion, and love all at once. The garden was no longer just a patch of earth behind the house. It was a threshold, a bridge between past and present, secrets and revelation. The grave had shown her the truth in all its terrifying clarity. The man she loved was more complex than she had ever imagined, shaped by loss and survival, by shadows and hidden dangers. She sank to the ground once more, tears streaming freely. Fear and sorrow mingled with determination. She would face him. She would uncover the full story. And whatever came next, redemption, forgiveness, danger, or love, she was ready. For the first time, Clara understood that the house, the garden, and the grave behind it were not just remnants of a past life. They were the key to understanding Elias, to understanding the man she had chosen to love, and to facing the shadows that had haunted them both. And as the night deepened, she made a silent vow. She would confront the past, no matter the cost. The Hartley mansion was quieter now than it had been in years, yet the calm was not empty. It was full of understanding, reflection, and subtle shifts in the air that spoke of balance restored. The household, long governed by fear and rigid hierarchy, had begun to embrace something new: respect, humility, and moral integrity. Lena moved through the corridors with her usual grace, but now there was a quiet recognition in every glance, a sense that her dignity and strength were seen and honored by all. Selina, once a towering figure of wealth and pride, was no longer the same. She walked more slowly, measuredly, as if each step reminded her that power without compassion carried consequences. Her sharp commands had softened into gentle guidance. When a servant hesitated, she offered correction with patience instead of anger. Her eyes, once harsh and calculating, now carried a trace of introspection and humility. The first moments of reconciliation were small, almost imperceptible, yet profoundly meaningful. Selina approached Lena in the kitchen, her hands slightly trembling, not from fear but from vulnerability. "Lena," she began quietly, her voice almost unrecognizable to those who had always known it as sharp and commanding. I owe you an apology. I treated you unfairly, and I see now how my arrogance blinded me. I am sorry. Lena looked at her, measuring the sincerity in her tone. She had long understood that true forgiveness required not just words, but reflection and genuine transformation. With a soft nod, she replied, "Thank you, Selena. That means more than you know." Acknowledging the mistake is the first step toward change. Her words were calm, patient, yet carried the weight of moral strength that had grown steadily over the past days. The household felt the shift immediately. Staff who had once tiptoed nervously now moved with a sense of ease and confidence. Small gestures, once unnoticed, became acts of mutual respect. Meals were served with attentive care, rooms were maintained with diligence, and the air of tension that had long dominated the mansion was replaced by a quiet harmony. Selena continued to reflect on her transformation. The embarrassment, the subtle humiliations, the fleeting loss of control. These experiences had not only humbled her but had also awakened empathy she had never known. She realized that wealth and status could never replace moral strength or human connection. The mansion, with its centuries of history, had been a silent teacher, guiding her toward understanding. Lena, for her part, embraced the recognition not with pride, but with quiet satisfaction. Her humility had been her strength all along, and now it was acknowledged not as weakness, but as moral authority. The experiences of the past days had solidified her understanding of justice. It was not punishment or vengeance, but the careful balance of dignity, patience, and integrity. She had endured cruelty, navigated moral dilemmas, and emerged as a figure of quiet power, a true leader in the eyes of the household. Maria, Lena's loyal friend, smiled knowingly as she observed the transformation. "You handled it beautifully," she whispered, as if speaking to the universe itself. "Your strength is in your restraint, your compassion, and your wisdom. That is the power that lasts." Lena nodded, her eyes reflecting gratitude and clarity. She understood now that the lessons of her ancestors were not mere stories. They were guiding principles for a life lived with dignity and purpose. Selena's growth extended beyond personal humility. She began to mentor the younger staff, particularly the women who looked to her as a figure of authority. She shared lessons from her own mistakes, emphasizing empathy, patience, and integrity. Her guidance was no longer rooted in fear or dominance, but in experience and moral authority. The mansion, once a place of rigid hierarchy, became a space of learning and personal growth, where every individual's worth was acknowledged. Lena's journey inspired more than respect. It inspired admiration. Her quiet strength became a beacon for others in the household, showing that moral authority could surpass wealth and status. The staff began to emulate her patience and integrity, creating a ripple effect that transformed not only interactions but the very atmosphere of the mansion. Her recognition was not just for endurance, but for the courage to act with wisdom and moral clarity in the face of adversity. Even the mansion itself seemed to acknowledge the restoration of balance. The family portrait that had once watched over moments of pride and arrogance now seemed at peace. The eyes that had judged coldly now glimmered with approval, reflecting the harmony that had been achieved through patience, understanding, and moral courage. The house, steeped in centuries of history, whispered its quiet approval of the restored karmic order. The true transformation, however, was internal. Selena had begun to shed the arrogance that had defined her life, replacing it with empathy, reflection, and accountability. Lena had embraced the power of dignity and restraint, demonstrating that moral authority could shape reality without cruelty. The reversal of roles, the challenges faced, and the lessons learned had culminated in a profound equilibrium. Justice had been restored not through humiliation, but through understanding. By the end of the day, the mansion was alive with subtle warmth. Conversations flowed more freely, laughter returned in gentle bursts, and the oppressive tension that had once dominated the halls was gone. The household, once divided by privilege and subservience, now moved with mutual respect, each member aware of their worth and the dignity of others. The final gesture of reconciliation came quietly. Selena approached Lena one evening as the sun set behind the estate's hills. She placed a hand gently on Lena's shoulder. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing me what true strength looks like." Lena smiled softly, warmth in her eyes, and replied, "We all have the chance to learn, Selena. Today we both have." The mansion settled into a calm, golden light as the day ended. Candles flickered softly, and the air felt lighter, infused with the subtle, enduring sense that justice, growth, and forgiveness had found their rightful place. The ancestors' lessons, once whispered through portraits and heirlooms, had been fulfilled. The balance of power and dignity was restored, leaving the household stronger, wiser, and more harmonious than ever before. The days after the confrontation were quiet, almost painfully so. The house, once heavy with secrets, felt different now, lighter though the shadows lingered in the corners. Clara moved through the rooms with a new awareness, a subtle reverence for the life she and Elias had survived together. The past was still there, etched into the walls, the soil, and the oak tree's shadow, but it no longer ruled her heart. She spent hours in the garden, standing where the grave had been, letting her fingers brush the earth. The hollow she had felt before was gone, replaced by a sense of solemn acknowledgement. That soil held a history she would never fully understand, but she could honor it, and in doing so she honored the man who had survived its darkness. Elias watched her quietly from a distance at first, then approaching slowly, hand extended in a gesture of trust and solidarity. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, eyes searching hers. Clara smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both sorrow and strength. "I'm learning to be," she admitted. "It's not easy, but I think I understand now. We carry the past with us, but it doesn't have to define us." He nodded, relief flickering across his face, mingled with gratitude and lingering guilt. There was still tension there, the kind born of trauma and secrets, but also the first hints of healing. Together they walked through the house, noticing details they had never appreciated. The sunlight spilling across the wooden floors, the warmth of the kitchen in the afternoon, the quiet hum of life beyond the walls. Clara reflected on her own journey. She had come to Willow Creek seeking peace, love, and perhaps escape from heartbreak, only to find herself entangled in a mystery far greater than she could have imagined. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and grief, but through it all she had grown stronger. She understood now that resilience was not the absence of pain, it was the ability to move forward despite it. And love, she realized, was not simple. It was messy, complex, full of fear, doubt, and vulnerability. But it was also transformative. Loving Elias meant embracing the entirety of who he was. His past, his secrets, his humanity. It meant facing darkness together and choosing to step into the light despite the scars. Some mornings she would stand by the oak tree, feeling the wind brush against her cheeks, and think of the grave that had once been there. It was a symbol, not of death, but of what had been hidden and revealed. Of survival, of courage, of the truths that can no longer remain buried. She felt a deep compassion for Elias, for herself, and for the life they were building together. Yet Clara also understood that forgiveness was a choice. She could not erase the pain of the past, nor could she change what had happened. But she could choose to carry it with grace, to honor it without letting it dominate her heart. The secrets of the house, the shadows of Elias's past, and the weight of their shared history had brought them to this point, a place of understanding, trust, and cautious hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, soft shadows over the garden, Clara felt a sense of closure she had not thought possible. The house remained, the oak tree still stood tall, and the grave behind it, though gone, remained a silent testament to the truth they had faced together. It was a reminder that secrets could no longer control them, that love could endure even in the presence of darkness, and that resilience could be found in the heart of the storm. Clara took a deep breath, exhaling the lingering tension from her body. She felt the warmth of Elias's hand in hers, the steady pulse of life and love beside her. Together they stood on the threshold of the future, scarred, perhaps, but unbroken. And in that quiet, reflective moment, Clara understood something profound. Life was not about perfection, nor was love about certainty. It was about facing the unknown with courage, choosing forgiveness when it was hardest, and embracing the beauty and complexity of human hearts, flawed and fragile, yet capable of extraordinary resilience. The grave behind the house would always be a memory, a symbol of what had been lost and what had been survived. But for Clara, it had become more than that. It was a testament to survival, truth, and the power of love that had endured, against the odds, through fear, sorrow, and shadow. And as she walked back into the house, hand in hand with Elias, Clara felt a quiet sense of peace, a fragile, radiant peace, and the knowledge that whatever the future held, they would face it together.